This video is part 2 for the Archlord Discordant. Hopefully you've already watched part 1. If not, it will be put into the description below. My plan for this miniature is to make it so it gets progressively different in the colour. So I'm actually starting it with it being dark at the top and it will end up being lighter at the bottom. Normally you should do this the other way around, because otherwise having it darker at the top will make the miniature look top heavy. But because this miniature is going to be mounted, it will actually work doing it this way around. However, normally you should do it the opposite way around. I started off with Ubshabti bone and applied several coats until I got a good solid base of the colour. Next I used pallid witch flesh to pick out the edges. However, I didn't quite go all the way down to the bottom of the feet. I covered approximately 3/4 of the miniature with the pallid witch flesh, and here you can see that the feet, the highlight was done with white scar instead. Next, for the areas where I want to apply some depth, I've used Agrax Earthshade, and this is for the areas where it's going to end up being red or orange. However, not for the areas where it's going to be yellow. For the areas where I plan on it being yellow, which is the feet and the lower part of the legs, I've used Seraphim Superior instead. Now for painting the main colour on the armour, I've started off with Ferragan Orange first, and the reason why I've started off with this one first is because this one is going to be in the middle. So then once this one is dry, then we can apply the colours for the top and the bottom afterwards, and we can apply therefore 2 colours at the same time. For the top, Angron Red was applied, and for the bottom I would have used a shade colour, but I don't have one available at the moment. So I've used Phalanx Yellow, and I've watered it down with water so it makes a glaze. And all 3 of these colours will take several coats to get the colour the way you want it to be. And you'll also notice that although I'm trying to blend these colours from the red to the orange and then to the yellow, the actual holster for his pistol is entirely red to give it a separation from the alternating colours of the armour. I've applied some silvers next, followed by using null oil to give the silvers some depth. And normally when I'm painting Khorne miniatures, as I'm sure you would yourself, the armour trims would normally be painted with golds, but with this miniature I decided that I painted it with gold. When it gets to the areas near the yellows, the gold's not really going to stand out against the yellow, so I've chose to do it with silvers instead, which will still look good because the overall miniature is going to be red and gold, because after all this one is going to be mounted onto a miniature. For the cloak, I obviously wanted it to stand out with the rest of the colours, so I started off initially with ultramarine blue, or I believe it's now called McCrag blue. For highlighting the cloth I used Russ grey, and I applied this with a dry brushing technique because I think this looks better when you're painting cloth type areas. And I've chosen to use this colour as opposed to using a lighter blue because it helps to mute the colour down a little bit rather than it being overly bright from another blue. After the greys had time to dry, a blue shade has been applied to the area, which helps to darken it down just slightly and blend these previous 2 colours into one another. And once that previous shade has dried, several thin washes of bloodletter were applied to the bottom of the cloth to give it a bit of a different tone, so it was a 2-tone piece of cloth, and this also helps to darken the miniature down a little bit. For the overall look of the weapon, I wanted to keep the housing of the weapon dark. However, I did apply a little bit of Scavenblight dinge on the outside of the edges just to give a little bit of a highlight. Cables were first painted with Corax white, Then Uriel Yellow was applied, and lastly Agrax Earthshade was added to the cables to make the cables slightly darker and dirtier. And then for the little arrow sign on the weapon, and also the eyes, and there's a couple of lenses from the backpack. Initially they were painted with white scar, and afterwards a blue shade was applied to these areas. And then after this it's time to glue it onto the main miniature, and it's then complete. If you like the video, remember to subscribe to help the channel, and also send links to your friends.